Today, we're going to do some of the work to begin developing our draft, keeping in mind this enduring understanding that writing is selecting, organizing, curating for your reader. The last lesson, we were looking at synthesizing and sort of how to make the decisions to combine what exactly we're combining, how we're bringing together details from our research with our own kind of perspective. Today, I want you to notice a couple of things. I want you to continue to notice how we're using the graph and Birkenstein kind of they say, I say thing. I want you to notice how I'm experimenting with narrative, using narrative in the service of the informational writing, like we saw in a previous video. And I want you to think about the decisions that we make as writers, how to paragraph, how we present information, which information we present in which order, transitions to make the synthesis smooth, the syntax and the transitions, the word choice, all these kinds of questions, given our purpose and audience. And our purpose is firstly to explore a big question, to do that research, but that research, that exploration then comes into this informational explanatory writing. And as we're informing, all the while we have to be making good choices, making choices as a writer to engage our reader. Our audience, a smart, sort of educated and curious set, but not experts in the field. We're still working with the general audience here. All right, so the draft. You'll see when you look quickly, you'll see that there have been edits since you saw this last, and that makes a lot of sense. So I want to kind of read for you and talk through how do we make these kinds of decisions. So we all realize that consciousness is one of the stickiest, most persistent mysteries. Thinkers and researchers in various fields are grappling with questions using the methodologies of their respective disciplines. It hardly needs mentioning that very smart people disagree on these questions. So you'll notice a couple things. At this point, I realized when I read this, we don't need that. That's redundant. If something is redundant, you get rid of it. And here, this change here is one of I started with big mysteries even today. And big mysteries just wasn't satisfying to me. So I experimented with the wording, and I'm landing, at the moment, I have one of the stickiest, most persistent mysteries. I think that word choice is more engaging. Here I noticed again, I deleted this because of redundancy. If they're exploring the questions, that's all we need to know. It's redundant to say that they're searching for answers, right? Let's continue on. Pursuing questions of consciousness illuminates the human tendency to project our own experiences onto other beings. We all know what it is to feel human, but scientists point out that we, quote, can't just assume that this is also true for other animals, particularly ones with such different brains from our own. Many point out that consciousness must be in some way material, and this material must be brain material. Somehow, the mushy pink biological brains of lobsters, dogs, and humans, though, does not hold the same power over our curiosity as does imagining the inner lives of these organisms and wondering what consciousness is possible in our fellow animals. What thoughts, emotions, self-awareness may these organisms share? Love, longing, disappointment, dread, hope. So in this paragraph, you begin to see the they say, I say piece, right? Pursuing questions of consciousness illuminates the human tendency. Now, I have actually started, unlike some of the mentor texts, I've started with the I say, right? In a way, that's something that I'm claiming, right? And after that I say, then I move to a they say, two different sources, details from the research, the ones you saw in the last video, which is from this piece in the BBC, as well as another piece in the New York Times. Now, a couple of things. When you're referring to your research, really you have two options. One is to quote, and that's what I've done here, BBC 2019. I've pulled a quote, that's why it's in quotation marks. But the next detail, I've actually chosen the other option, which is to paraphrase. Many point out that consciousness must be in some way material. Note that there's no quote there, but there is a citation. An idea that comes from somewhere else must be cited, right? You can use the idea, but you have to attribute it. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. So In these couple of sentences, you see those two different ways that you work with the source material. You can quote it, in which case you need a citation, or you can paraphrase it, which is what I've done here. You still need a citation. Um, Now here we get into the choices of a writer somehow distinguishing the mushy pink biological brains. Mushy and pink, that's a nice like writerly detail, right? It's fun, but it does get into this distinction between kind of the brain and the mind, right? Um, Finally, as I read this a second time, I realized that bringing these ideas together with with a couple of questions, could be a good idea. And this bit that I added, this last sort of sentence here, helped me to get from where this paragraph was going, this second paragraph, down into this third paragraph. Beyond projecting, though, humans seem to have a psychological need to distinguish our very humanness, to define as precisely as possible what makes us us and what makes them them. In fact, this need may be more cultural and psychological, but we certainly see evidence of it in our obsession, both in popular culture and academia, with these questions. Um, Now, this is in a different color. This next paragraph is in a different color because I've just added it. And here's the place where I'm trying to incorporate narrative, like we saw in the Cy Montgomery text. So I've just written this. Not sure how effective it is. I'm going to need to come back to it with fresh eyes later, but I'll read it for you now in its current state. The desire to distinguish between what is and what is not is something I see every day as I have a toddler. At this particular moment in time, he is obsessed with describing his world. Yesterday, after my wife came home from the market in La Marsa, my son thoroughly separated the fruit into distinct piles. This is a peach. This is not an apricot. This is an avocado, not a pomegranate. He methodically went through all the fruit in this way, in both English and French. I cannot help but wonder what is the cultural source of our need to categorize in this way. The biggest categorization in our own self-aware, perhaps self-obsessed species is what makes us human. If lobsters can experience longing and dogs can worry about their lives beyond their physical biological prime, perhaps knowing this will enable us to say something further, something more precise about what makes us us. We are human, not lobsters. This is not a pomegranate. Uh, right, so you sense that narrative, something that just happened yesterday with the market. Notice in this writing how I'm trying to explore questions and create coherence through my own writing by sort of connecting back into the text itself, right? So from the very first or second paragraph, we have kind of humans, lobsters, dogs, right? Now we're adding like categories of fruit into that. This will fit into those two verbs we have in our purpose, right? The purpose for this task, which is to explore and to engage a writer, right? So if we're exploring, that means we're looking at it from multiple angles. And if we are engaging, that means we're going to have to bring that reader along on that exploration. And we can do that by trying to create coherence within our own writing. In any event, the obsession with big questions illuminates something else about what it means to be human. We are inevitably attracted to that which is challenging, puzzling, maybe even unsolvable. Of course, there are those who are quite content to space out and watch Netflix, but as a species, our thirst for knowledge is voracious. This is true even when there is no easily discernible economic value in the knowledge we pursue. That is, knowing more about animal consciousness will not necessarily contribute to the economy. We're not talking about science as a vehicle for technological innovation here, but science for its own sake. And that, I think, is something that makes our species beautiful. Okay, so a couple of things. Notice transitions, right? Originally, I had moreover, and as I read this again with fresh eyes and revised, I thought, moreover, is that what I'm saying? You really have to ask yourself that. These words, however, moreover, nevertheless, those kinds of transition words that you use, they're not just there to like sound sexy. They have actual meanings, and when we're using them, we have to think about what it is they mean. So I actually decided to get rid of the moreover and replace that with any event. And in part, that's because of the relationship between this paragraph and the last paragraph. You got to be logical, and you got to think through what exactly it is that you're doing. The other choice I wanted to mention is in this last sentence. And originally I said I would argue, and I kind of realized, you know what, that sounds more, that's a different kind of tone, right? I'm trying in a way to be conversational here. Now that's a choice. Your piece doesn't have to be conversational. But I thought that I decided to replace I would argue with I think, um, because it felt more informal and it felt more somehow genuine to me. So in your own writing, you're going to have to think about these same kinds of questions. The ones that we're noticing today in particular are how we're kind of using these in the real world, how we experiment with narrative, how and when we make the decision to use narrative in our informational writing, and then of course how we engage, and that for that we're always keeping our purpose and our audience right in the forefront of our minds.